Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Today marked the fourth day of the inquest into Aisha Hudson's death in Winnipeg. Testifying today were Constables Sylvester and Carnegie as witnesses. Our Julia Ross was there.
Constable Pradnuk's partner, Constable Serge Sylvester, testified today, along with K-9 officer Constable Ian Carnegie. Pradnuk testified yesterday that he was unable to tell the effectiveness of the two shots fired at Aisha Hudson, and that the second shot was fired after Hudson's vehicle began to move forward after reversing. Constable Carnegie says he filed a use of force report as he used an empty-handed control to pull Miss Hudson out of the vehicle to arrest her. He says that she was not responding to commands to exit, resulting in her being pulled out of the vehicle. Carnegie testified that he was not aware that Hudson had been shot, and when he noticed an injury to her nose, he believed it was from the collision between her vehicle and the pickup truck that ended the pursuit. Carnegie says he called an ambulance and was told after arresting Hudson by Constable Pradnuk that shots had been fired. Pradnuk began first aid after identifying the wound and began CPR when Hudson became unresponsive. Constable Sylvester testified that he had been pulling on a door handle on the driver's side of Hudson's vehicle when she began to reverse towards him, resulting in Pradnuk's initial shot. Carnegie says that no one voiced over the radio to abort the pursuit. Both Carnegie and Sylvester testified that there is no training that could be done to further prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. Julia Ross, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Julia. RCMP have issued a dangerous person alert for Pimachikamak Cree Nation and surrounding areas after a man violently abducted a woman from a residence in the community this morning. RCMP believes she is in imminent danger. RCMP say to be on the lookout for 39-year-old Joshua Papanicus, pictured here. They warn not to approach Papanicus as he is considered armed and dangerous. Around 5:40 a.m. this morning, Cross Lake RCMP responded to a report of aggravated assault in the Pimachikamak Cree Nation. They say an investigation determined Papanicus entered a residence and struck a 24-year-old resident with a hammer. They say he then allegedly abducted a 20-year-old Rayanne Thomas and was last seen fleeing on foot with Thomas. Search efforts are still underway in Pimachikamak, but it is possible, RCMP say, Papanicus fled the community. RCMP have confirmed to APTN News that the two are known to each other and that this is a case of intimate partner violence. A large-scale effort is underway as they believe she is in imminent danger. Anyone with information on their whereabouts is asked to contact Cross Lake RCMP at 204-676-2600. An Ontario woman facing a $500,000 lawsuit over allegations she accused the mother and her three daughters of being pretendians is now responding in court. Our reporter Sarah Connors, who first broke this story, has the latest.
A woman in Ontario being sued for accusing a mother and her three daughters of being pretendians has filed a statement of defense denying the claims made against her. Michelle Christine Cameron, who goes by the name Crystal Mariah Semeganis, filed the statement of defense in the Supreme Court of Yukon on January 29th. The filing denies Semeganis published any defamatory comments about the women and argues that even if she did, they were true and made in the public interest. Semeganis describes herself as an activist against pretendians, a pejorative term used to describe someone falsely claiming Indigenous heritage. She's also the leader of the Ghost Warrior Society, which aims to expose what it considers to be false claims of Indigenous ancestry. Louise Derrick and her three daughters sued Semeganis last summer. The statement of claim accuses Semeganis of engaging in a relentless and libelous campaign against the women, particularly Derrick's daughter, Amanda Buffalo. It alleges Semeganis accused the women of falsely claiming Indigenous heritage for personal and professional gain and is seeking $500,000 in damages. The statement of defense asked for the lawsuit to be dismissed. Neither the statement of claim or defense have been tested in court. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Thanks, Sarah. An Indigenous business group is calling on the Ontario government to reconsider legislation which is designed to strengthen the provincial economy and support manufacturing within the province. The Buy Ontario Act mandates public sector entities prioritize buying made in Ontario goods and services. But a First Nations association says the act leaves out First Nations owned and Northern Ontario based businesses. APTN's Mike McDonald has more.
The Anishinaabe Business Professional Association sent a letter last month to Ontario Minister of Public and Business Services Delivery and Procurement Stephen Crawford. It states the group's strategic review of the Buy Ontario Act found its definition of an Ontario business favors southern, urban, and non-Indigenous entities. Jason Razovich is the association's president.
Part of it are the issues around the definition of an Ontario business. We're seeing that this requires 250 employees for it to be headquartered with a Southern Ontario focus. Shows that it favors factories that may be based in Toronto, and it doesn't reflect the realities of the North, like Thunder Bay, and the small medium enterprises such as Indigenous businesses.
Among the recommendations made by the association is a 5% Indigenous procurement target and an updating of the definition of an Ontario business to recognize First Nations and Métis enterprises. Landon Jourdain, a senior business consultant with Fort William First Nation-based Wawano Consultancy, says the act represents a step in the wrong direction on the path to reconciliation.
Canada as a whole and the provinces have been touting reconciliation for years now, but then go and pass legislation where they openly say they didn't consider First Nations communities or the North as a whole. And I feel like Northern Ontario tends to get marginalized consistently by Southern Ontario because, we're out of sight, out of mind, I suppose.
Razovich adds leaving out the Indigenous business community ignores a major economic driver in the North.
One of the studies that we released last January showcased that Indigenous businesses and the Indigenous spend in the city of Thunder Bay, for example, contributes 1.5 billion to the region, and it provides a direct and indirect opportunity and is a main driver of our economy here in the city.
Since issuing its letter to the province, the association has received the support of the Anishinaabe Nation in its call for changes to the Buy Ontario Act. Razovich hopes this support will get the attention of Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Thanks, Mike. Now to a missing art mystery. The issue of missing pieces of artwork from the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations came up at a parliamentary committee meeting in Ottawa on Thursday. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Rebecca Alty and department officials appeared before the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee. It was to answer questions on the Budget Implementation Act. But Conservative members pressed the department about the missing art. A 2024 audit revealed 132 pieces of the department's $14.4 million Indigenous art collection are unaccounted for. The works are looked after by the Indigenous Art Centre in Gatineau, Quebec, but due to renovations, they were moved to 2 temporary storage facilities in 2022. Conservative MP Jamie Schmale asked why the department has not responded to a request on which pieces are missing. Crown Indigenous Relations Deputy Minister Valerie Gideon responded.
So out of the 132 unaccounted for items, we have 71 that remain unaccounted, but 66 of those 71 were acquired by regional offices prior to 1994. So just to respond, we have contacted all of the artists as noted. They have not consented in writing to sharing the information through the Access to Information Act request. That is why we are unable to provide the information on that front, because we do not have their written consent.
Time for a quick break, and then our Truth and Politics panel will be here to discuss the ongoing inquest into the death of Aisha Hudson. Stick around. Welcome back. As we've been reporting, an inquest is currently underway in Winnipeg into the shooting death of 16-year-old Aisha Hudson. Hudson was shot and killed by a Winnipeg police officer in 2020 following a high-speed car chase prompted by an alleged liquor store robbery. Our weekly Truth in Politics panel is here for more on this. Also this week, the Conservative Party convention and pop star Billie Eilish's stolen land comment at the Grammys. Joining me is Jennifer Leywitz, the CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Nigan Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Nigan, great to have you with us. Nigan, we'll start with you and the ongoing inquest into the death of Aisha Hudson, killed by a Winnipeg police officer in 2020 following a high-speed pursuit and alleged liquor store robbery. What's your take on what we've heard so far?
So the first thing I guess people really should know is that this is an inquest. This is not a seeking of trying to find where the guilt lies, although certainly that may come evident as the hearings continue. This is about trying to come up with some kind of method of prevention or examine the systemic causes which led to the shooting of Aisha Hudson by Winnipeg police. Two things that have come out very clear in the hearings. The first is that Winnipeg police clearly felt pressured to do something about the spate of alleged liquor store robberies that were taking place. And so they felt that they needed to be aggressive, and they needed to be aggressive in a kind of public response. The second is that the Winnipeg police officers, what they're claiming to be a situation in which they felt threatened by Aisha behind the wheel of the car, the video evidence does not support that. It certainly suggests that there was a different, perhaps, reason why she was shot behind the driver's wheel. In fact, it just is so eerily similar to the situation in Minneapolis, in which you're seeing police officers saying one story and the actual people who are taking the video showing a much different scenario. It's a lot of very eerie similarities to what we're seeing in the States, and so it's hard not to notice that. And what I hope is that the public's really keeping an eye on this, because what you're beginning to see is you're seeing a police force that is responding to what has been a post-pandemic kind of sense of Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations as being rather at odds, quite in conflict.
Jennifer, an inquest of this nature does not assign blame, but is looking at what role, if any, systemic racism may have played and whether the use of force was necessary. The officer who fired the shots has already been cleared of any criminal charges. Why do you think an inquest like this is still important?
Well, inquests into things like this are incredibly important. I talk about this on social media often when it comes to state power and the use of state power against citizens, is that, yes, this is not a trial, but this is the fact-finding process, and it needs to be part of that process after any time, again, police and government and anything that's a branch of it uses, state power against the people and any force, so that exactly what Nigan said is we can find out exactly why that happened and what recommendations can come from that. And in instances like this, recommendations can include, reviewing high-speed pursuits, how we use force against youth, and all of those different types of things. So I think that this is really important, but it's not just about doing the inquest, because we have inquests all the time, when there's people that are, passing away in jail and people that are passing away at the hands of police. But whether or not we actually take those recommendations and we actually, put them into action, because we hear about this all the time where there's inquests, and often they're very lengthy. They require a lot of resources and all of those things. But we need these bodies and our governments and our institutions to actually take those recommendations seriously and see that systemic change.
Yeah, Nigan, like Jen says, look at the Phoenix Sinclair inquest, the largest, most expensive in provincial history, and many of those recommendations never touched. What are your hopes? What are you expecting to come out of this inquest?
I ran into one of the members of Aisha Hudson's family just a couple days before the inquest had happened. And this family member who shared with me that they were very optimistic that not so much for the inquest itself and the fact that the recommendations will probably not followed up, but there's certainly to indicate that there's a great deal of gaps in problems, systemic issues. And just if you look at Aisha Hudson's life, it wasn't really about that day. It was about all the things that had failed her up to that point, and including the training of those officers. And so the fact is that there was a number of failures that have systemically have led to a kind of acrimonious relationship between Indigenous young people in particular, and then also the fact that she's two-spirit, and the way that she's dressed or the way that she's presented and the ways that the officers perceived her. A whole bunch of different things that are going to come in. But the family member said that it's not really so much about the inquest that we're so concerned about. It's the fact that we'll hear the discussion of what happened to Aisha, what her life story was, and most importantly, that she was a human being, a beautiful human being that we are all less than now that she's gone. And so that perhaps might be the biggest story here, is that we must never forget that this young person who had such promise and such opportunity and hope and had been just taken so tragically from us, and for reasons that are really very solvable. They should never have happened in the first place.
Jen, wanted to move on to the Conservative convention where you did pay to get in last week. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, political conventions are always a little bit weird, especially if you're Indigenous, and obviously there's going to be criticism online, especially being an Indigenous woman that shows up in a space like that. I've always been vocal about the fact that, the Conservative Party represents the majority of Saskatchewan. Up until last election, every single seat was Conservative. And I often remind people that, number one, no political party owns us, but our representation in all of those spaces is still very important, because we shouldn't go in with the idea of how do I take this and sell it to people, but rather how do I take what issues matter to us and why we should be included in these spaces and bring it there. And I saw a prime example of this over the last few days, where the Conservatives have gone pretty heavily under fire about the conversion therapy vote that happened a couple years ago, which they pivoted on. That came up again at convention, where there was a policy to reopen that debate, and it was narrowly defeated. And that's one of those areas where it's like, that is why representation and the diversity of people in politics is so important, because had the people that were against that type of issue and reopening the conversion therapy vote not attend, that might have passed, and that might have ended back up into the policy directive and might have been an issue on the Conservative Party's agenda if they ever form government. So those are those areas where, it does matter for us to be there, but I won't lie, it is really tough in 2026 to show up in spaces where we know that we have so many big issues nationally right now that we're trying to navigate, and then you go to a political party convention for one of the biggest political parties and none of those things are mentioned. It's like, how can a government be ready, or how can a party be the government in waiting until it gets to that point where it's ready to address those things?
And Jennifer did a whole op-ed on her experience at the Conservative convention. You can read that now over on our website, aptnnews.ca. We're going to talk about Billie Eilish over on the podcast. Thanks to you both.
Thanks.
APTN Investigates returns this weekend with an all-new episode. We've got a preview of that and tonight's Nation to Nation after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And a furry little rabbit was spotted in Fran's front yard after she snapped this photo. And she immediately sent it to be shared with all of us. Thanks, Fran. Remember, for the chance to be our next photo of the day, send a picture right now to share@aptn.ca. Now let's look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, -6 for Fredericton, 3 below and cloudy for Halifax. -24 for Kuujjuaq, 15 below with the sun out in Nain. -5 in Montreal, cloudy and 8 below for Chibougamau. -3 with the sun out in Sault Ste. Marie, cloudy and -5 for North Bay. -7 for Thunder Bay, sunny and -14 for Sioux Lookout. -27 for Churchill, 19 below for Norway House. -13 for Winnipeg, 18 below in Barons River. -2 for Regina and Saskatoon, 3 below for North Battleford. -2 in Meadow Lake, snow and 8 below for Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, -10 for High Level, cloudy and 5 below for Fort McMurray. 0 for Edmonton, +15 with the sun out in Lethbridge. 13 above in Vancouver and sunny, 5 in Kamloops. 3 for Prince George and Smithers, +1 in Dease Lake. -36 for Old Crow, +1 for Whitehorse. -19 for Yellowknife, 18 below in Norman Wells. -31 for Sax Harbor, 35 below in Inuvik. -31 for Chesterfield and Whale Cove, 32 below for Baker Lake. -37 in Resolute, 38 below in Igloolik. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Nation to Nation host Karen Pugliese has a preview of tonight's episode.
Today on Nation to Nation, U.S. President Donald Trump may have stepped back publicly, but Greenland's leadership says American ambitions haven't changed. We talked to two of our reporters who were just in Greenland about what they saw, what they heard, and why this moment's not over. We've got that coming up in less than 5 minutes, so please stick around.
Thanks, Karen. APTN Investigates returns this week with an all-new episode. Reporter Kenneth Jackson sets out to expose how wartime industrial and government decisions poisoned land and water in the village of Noble, Ontario. It's another chapter of Canada's toxic legacy in the heart of the Anishinaabe territory, as contamination remains today. And the chief of nearby Shawanaga First Nation is demanding Canada clean up its mess. Here's a preview.
When you're dealing with tens of millions of pounds of explosives and chemicals, it has to go somewhere.
They built explosives here. They needed components for explosives. The local legend is that munitions were actually dumped there when they closed the plant and walked away.
It's now affectionately known as Gun Cotton Creek.
The stakes are high. The stakes are really high.
My grandfather, Alfred, raised the kids at Nobel. They had 12 kids. And out of the 12 kids, 5 of them suffered serious forms of cancer. From stomach to brain cancers, thyroid cancers.
What do you think's stuck in the ground there?
I think persistent contaminants that never go away.
I think to work there for like 30, 40 years breathing the ethylene glycol, the nitrate fumes was not good.
Clean up the land, return it to the First Nations. We want to be part of the direction that fixes what our governments have done.
And you can catch APTN Investigates War on the Land airing this Saturday on APTN. And we will speak with Kenneth about the documentary right here tomorrow night. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Stick around. Karen is up next with Nation to Nation. We'll see you back here tomorrow.